A desperate plea for help is coming from the family of a woman missing in Halifax. Loretta Saunders, at just 26 years old and pregnant, disappeared a week ago. 8 agonizing days have now passed since the young Inuit woman from Nova Scotia vanished into thin air. And while her vehicle has since been discovered in southern Ontario, there is still no trace of Loretta Saunders, leaving her family and police grappling with a growing list of questions. 2 weeks earlier, the story began when Loretta Saunders, a 26-year-old university student in Halifax, simply disappeared. A massive search effort, fueled by incredible volunteers, was launched with the single-minded goal of bringing her home safely. But that hope was extinguished last night with the grim discovery of her body, turning the case into a homicide investigation. As one Aboriginal leader put it, the date, February 13, 2014. The location, Halifax, Canada. A 26-year-old criminology student named Loretta Saunders steps out of her residence to collect rent from an apartment she was subletting. It was a completely ordinary task, something she'd done before. She had a couple of brief meetings planned before she was expected right back home, but she never returned. The next day, her boyfriend got a bizarre text from her phone, and an unsettling feeling washed over him. Something was terribly wrong. The message said she was so anxious she couldn't even recall her own mother's maiden name. It was utterly strange. Mere moments later, a second text arrived, stating she was staying at a friend's place and would talk to him later. None of it made sense. The messages were blunt and impersonal, completely unlike Loretta's usual style. Her family's concern quickly turned to alarm. Loretta was the type of person who was in constant contact with her family, often checking in multiple times a day. So, for her to go completely silent was not just unusual, it was a massive red flag. As days bled into one another, there were no sightings and no word from Loretta. Her car had also vanished, yet all her personal belongings remained untouched inside her home. Building security cameras confirmed that earlier on the morning she disappeared, she had entered her apartment to meet with her tenants. After that moment, no surveillance footage ever captured her leaving. But that very evening, her bank card suddenly became active. Store security footage captured an unknown woman using Loretta's card to pay for items. Then came another transaction and another video. This time, the cameras showed a different person entirely behind the wheel of Loretta's car. A few days after that, the vehicle was found by police hundreds of miles from Halifax, and occupying a house nearby were the very same individuals who had been renting Loretta's apartment. As detectives began re-examining the surveillance footage from her building, they spotted something that made them freeze the frame. It was February 13th. At 2:30 in the afternoon, one of the tenants is seen walking out of the building. He is carrying a large hockey duffel bag that appears to be extremely heavy. Then, more bags follow. A horrifying theory began to form in the investigators' minds. It was possible he was removing Loretta's body from the building in sections. But when law enforcement finally closed in on them, they walked into a horrific scene. What they uncovered left seasoned officers speechless. Some of them, quite frankly, were brought to tears when they finally learned the motive behind this horrific act. And to fully comprehend the events that unfolded, and to confirm that the victim was, in fact, Loretta, we have to travel back to where her story truly began. All right, everyone, I'm just going to take a quick moment here. I'm always fascinated to know where my audience is joining from, so do me a favor, let me know your city and the current time where you are. Thank you so much for taking a second to share that with me. Just drop it in the comments section, and we will continue with the story. At 26 years old, Loretta Saunders was at a thrilling new stage of her life. She was pursuing a degree in criminology at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Canada. Loretta hailed from a large and deeply affectionate family. She was one of 8 children, and despite the physical distance between them, she and her 7 siblings shared an unbreakable connection. They were the kind of family whose closeness was never diminished by geography. Loretta was a young Indigenous woman from Newfoundland and Labrador, and her life's journey had been fraught with challenges. She and her relatives had endured significant hardship throughout the years. Her sibling, DM, formerly known as Delilah, later disclosed that their upbringing was marred by both physical and sexual abuse. Their educational opportunities were scarce, and at various points, both had grappled with the devastating cycle of addiction. Having just crossed the threshold into adulthood, Loretta made a bold leap, deciding to move to Montreal all by herself. It was a profound change for her. And to be perfectly honest, That period of adjustment was immensely taxing and difficult. Heartbreakingly, her mother, Miriam, would later share that Loretta eventually became trapped in a severe addiction to drugs. The situation escalated to the point where she found herself homeless. But Miriam stressed that Loretta possessed an unyielding spirit and refused to be defeated by her addiction. She was fiercely committed to getting clean and putting the pieces of her life back together. She entered a methadone treatment program, and gradually, her life started to find its footing once more. Model. With her life finally getting on track, she sent an application to St. Mary's University. The day she received her acceptance letter was a moment of pure joy. It felt like a massive turning point. She had already mapped out her future. After graduation, she would head to law school with the goal of becoming an attorney. When the time came to select a topic for her university thesis, there wasn't a moment's hesitation. Her focus would be the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, a cause that resonated deep within her. She was determined to amplify the voices of those who had been systematically silenced. This drive was fueled by the painful experiences she and her own family had endured, and she even dreamed of one day producing documentaries on the subject. In the midst of all this, her personal life was also flourishing. For nearly 3 years, she had been in a loving relationship with Yelchin Solte. Yelchin would later recall how they had just gotten back from visiting his family in Turkey, and he had been telling everyone that he knew she was the one for him. And then, their happiness grew even more. Loretta discovered she was 3 months pregnant. The news filled her with elation. She was ready to start a family of her own. She and Yelchin had moved into his place together, so to bring in some extra income, Loretta decided to sublet her old apartment. At that moment, Loretta Saunders' future looked incredibly bright, a testament to the profound, positive turns her life had taken. It truly felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter for both her and Yelchin, with a baby on the horizon. Graduation was just 2 months away, and her heart was filled with anticipation for what lay ahead. But on February 14th, 2014, Yelchin placed a frantic call to DM. He wanted to know if she'd had any contact with Loretta. He hadn't heard from her since the previous day, and a cold wave of panic was setting in. Yelchin frantically explained that 2 bizarre text messages had come through from Loretta's phone, and he said the tone felt strained and unnatural. On top of that, it appeared she had abruptly blocked access to her online bank accounts. One of the texts read, "I'm so nervous that I can't even remember my own mother's maiden name." Like seriously? A second message followed, saying, "I'm gonna stay at a friend's place tonight, and I'll talk to you later." He was completely baffled as to who this friend could possibly be. The message was curt, offering no details whatsoever. DM confirmed that she hadn't seen or heard from Loretta either. With each hour that ticked by, a heavy sense of dread grew within Loretta's parents. Loretta was someone who was in constant contact with her family, checking in multiple times a day. This profound silence wasn't just out of character, it was terrifying. Over the next several days, a desperate chain of phone calls began, with everyone checking in with each other, clinging to the hope that someone, anyone, had heard from her. But the answer was always the same. No one had seen her. No one had spoken to her. Her car was also gone, yet all of her personal effects remained inside their home. On the 3rd day, the call was made to law enforcement, and an official missing person report was filed. Detectives soon arrived at the residence Loretta shared with Yelchin. By all accounts, Yelchin was the last person to have seen her. He recounted to the investigators that on February 13th, Loretta had a packed schedule ahead of her. She was trying to balance a long list of errands and responsibilities on top of all her schoolwork. Her day was set to begin with a stop at her apartment to pick up a rent payment from her new tenants. From that point on, her day was a blur of constant activity, moving from one task to the next. He also stressed to the police that when she left that morning, she showed no signs of being worried or under any duress. Loretta was known for being meticulously organized, calm, and always composed. It was part of her very nature, which made the 2 text messages he'd received from her phone feel profoundly wrong, completely alien to the woman he knew. Police conducted a search of the couple's home before departing. By the time they left, they were satisfied that Yelchin was not involved in her disappearance and was just as desperate for her safe return as everyone else. From there, officers proceeded to Loretta's apartment at 41 Cowie Hill Drive, Unit 103. They found the apartment empty, but there were no immediate signs of a struggle or anything suspicious. The space was tidy, and nothing appeared to be disturbed or out of place. Investigators were informed that the couple subletting the unit had left town a few days prior for Valentine's Day and had not yet returned. A security camera positioned at the building's entrance had a clear view of the front door. A review of the video confirmed that Loretta had indeed entered the building just before 11 o'clock on the morning of February 13th. Because she had now been missing for 4 days, investigators were faced with an enormous amount of surveillance footage to analyze. Detectives had to consider the theory that Loretta might have remained inside her apartment while her tenants were gone, only to leave at a later time. This meant investigators were tasked with the painstaking job of scrutinizing footage from every camera and monitoring every exit, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. In Halifax, the family of a missing woman is making a desperate plea for the public's help. 26-year-old Loretta Saunders, who was pregnant, vanished last week without a trace. After an exhaustive search of this Halifax apartment building, investigators are still haunted by one question. Where is Loretta Saunders? She was an Inuk woman from a community in Labrador who had overcome a difficult life and was finally getting on track. Supporters are now blanketing the area with a new wave of posters, desperate for any possible leads. More of her relatives are flying into Halifax next week, preparing to confront this agonizing mystery together. We'd like to issue a nationwide plea, asking if anyone has seen her vehicle or has any information whatsoever. Her strength is incredible, and honestly, that's what is keeping me going through all this, knowing that she wouldn't want us to, waste our time crying or just, sitting here feeling defeated. She is brilliant, and she is my entire world. She is absolutely everything to me. This was a young woman attending university who checked in with her family every single day until February 13th. And after that day, there was nothing but silence. Well, I had met her through some mutual friends back in Halifax. Loretta's boyfriend stated he hadn't laid eyes on her since the previous Thursday. He mentioned she was headed over to meet with her roommates. He said she was completely stressed out, that she'd gotten locked out, couldn't access her online banking, and that she desperately needed some money. It's that kind of stress where you feel like you can't even recall your own mother's maiden name. We have to. We have to find her. In response, a Facebook campaign was launched with the mission of bringing Loretta home safely. A fundraiser was set up online to help with travel expenses so that Loretta's family could make the journey from Newfoundland and Labrador to Nova Scotia. The hope was to bring 5 of her brothers and her parents together to support each other during the search. In just a handful of days, they had raised all the necessary funds, and the family was finally able to be together. Detectives also questioned Blake and Victoria, the tenants who were renting Loretta's apartment. They claimed they also hadn't seen or heard from her in several days. According to their account, they were a considerable distance from the city, somewhere around 200 miles away. Because of that, they insisted they couldn't offer much help to the investigation. Shortly thereafter, detectives made a pivotal discovery. Loretta's bank cards were still active and had been used for several tap-to-pay purchases. At first, this discovery brought investigators a small sense of relief. Could it be a good sign? Was it possible Loretta was still out there? On February 13th, just before 5 o'clock in the evening, Loretta's card was swiped at a local store. Surveillance footage caught her car parked near the entrance. However, the woman who used the card bore no resemblance to Loretta. Only a few minutes later, the card was used once more, this time at a Tim Hortons located about 10 miles from her apartment. The security video showed a woman in a blue jacket. When the employee at the cash register moved aside, the camera caught a brief glimpse of the person behind the wheel. That individual was also clearly not Loretta. 5 days later, a call came into the Halifax Detective Bureau from another police department. Loretta's car had been located hundreds of miles away in Harrow, Ontario. The car was found parked in front of a private home, and the occupants of that house were none other than Blake Leott and Victoria Henneberry, who were Loretta's tenants. They were apprehended for being in possession of a stolen vehicle, but even with the arrest, police were far from having any real answers. Investigators were now faced with figuring out what had taken place, where Loretta could be, and if these two were directly tied to her disappearance. It has now been 8 days since a young Inuk woman disappeared without a trace in Nova Scotia, and though her car has been recovered in southern Ontario, Loretta Saunders has not. The situation has left both law enforcement and her family with an overwhelming number of questions. Her vehicle was discovered at this residence in Harrow, Ontario. Her two new roommates, Victoria Henneberry and Blake Legere, were hit with charges for stealing Saunders' vehicle and the illegal use of her bank card. They are facing charges for the unauthorized use of a bank card belonging to Miss Saunders. My deepest fear is that they're holding her somewhere. I just keep thinking that she has to be out there somewhere. As the hunt for evidence presses on, investigators are arranging to fly to Ontario to bring the two accused individuals back to Nova Scotia. Blake claimed to police that Loretta had sold him the car right before they departed from the city. He reasoned that the price she asked for was less expensive than the cost of a plane ticket. He said he was thrilled to make the deal, but investigators soon found out that both suspects were already wanted on other matters. Blake had an active warrant for failing to show up to a court hearing in Calgary, and Victoria was wanted for allegedly making threats against a person in Halifax, Model. When police conducted their search, they found Loretta's phone, and Victoria was the one who had it. Blake, meanwhile, was in possession of Loretta's bank cards. The next move for investigators was to pull the building's security footage, hunting for any sign of Blake or Victoria on that day. At 2:30 in the afternoon on February 13th, the video captures Blake moving through the building, hauling what appears to be an extremely heavy hockey bag. He maneuvered the bag outside, then slipped back into the apartment, only to re-emerge about 30 minutes later. This time, he was carrying more bags. Then came a third and final trip, and on this one, Victoria was right there with him. For the officers watching, knowing what they already suspected, the footage was utterly bone-chilling. A horrifying picture was forming in their minds. Loretta was almost certainly inside that bag, and this was no longer a rescue mission. Blake and Victoria weren't talking, but when investigators finally cracked into Blake's phone, they uncovered what was essentially a confession. Just a few days before Loretta vanished, Blake had recorded a drunken, rambling argument between himself and Victoria. "Are you hungry? Stop it. Are you hungry? Wait for me. Are you hungry? You can't even admit that you want to kill Loretta. Really? You were the one who said you wanted to kill her earlier? When did I say that? Don't you lie about who I want to kill? Maybe you're the one who should stop lying. Then who do you want to kill?" Detectives theorized that Victoria would be the easier one to break, so they made a strategic decision to show her the video. Following a long, tense silence, she finally broke down, saying, "He did it. He's the one who killed her. He put a bag over her head and suffocated her." According to Victoria, the motive was shockingly simple. They wanted to avoid paying the rent they owed. That was her explanation for the brutal series of events that unfolded that day. In her telling of the story, their mounting debt and financial desperation had pushed Blake to commit a terrible act. But as the investigation deepened, a more accurate picture began to emerge. Detectives soon discovered that Loretta had already demanded they leave the apartment. Her decision wasn't out of the blue. It was the result of months of escalating tension between them. They were constantly late on rent, if they paid it at all, and Loretta's patience had finally run out. At that point, their debt had reached around $600, but for Loretta, it had become a matter of principle. She simply couldn't allow the situation to continue. That was the reason she went to the apartment that day. Her plan was straightforward. She intended to collect the money she was owed and make sure they left the property for good. All the while, the police investigation was intensifying. Detectives leaned hard on Victoria for more information, desperate for any detail that would help them piece together Loretta's final moments. Over and over during the interrogations, they pushed her to reveal the one critical piece of information they were missing: Loretta's location. As the days dragged on, her family and friends were left in an agonizing limbo. After nearly 2 weeks of tireless searching, Victoria finally cracked and agreed to lead investigators to the site. She took them to a spot on the side of a highway, not much more than 300 meters from where the whole ordeal had begun. There, the search came to its horrifying conclusion. They had found Loretta's body. 2 weeks ago, 26-year-old Halifax University student Loretta Saunders vanished. An incredible volunteer effort mobilized to try to find her, to bring this woman home safely. And as one Aboriginal leader put it last night, after it was confirmed her body was found and this was a homicide case, people were just so incredibly saddened. People had stepped up and fallen in love with this woman. So, Elizabeth, talk about the two people now facing theft charges after being found in Ontario with Saunders' car. What do we know about them? One has a bail hearing in Halifax tomorrow. The other was interrogated by Halifax police yesterday. And late yesterday afternoon, police officially announced they had a homicide investigation on their hands and that the body of Loretta Saunders had been discovered. She was found inside that hockey bag, the very one they had forced her into after the attack. It was the same bag seen on camera being hauled from the apartment and transported from the crime scene. That is how she was found. Hidden, silent, and abandoned, as if her very life could be concealed and discarded along with her body. It was that one detail that made the brutality of it all so much more chilling. The autopsy, performed by forensic pathologists, was meant to uncover precisely how she died. What they found confirmed everyone's darkest suspicions. The conclusion was unmistakable. Loretta had been suffocated. This finding made official what the circumstances of her disappearance had already strongly indicated. Her death was the result of a violent act, one that left her with absolutely no chance to escape. Emotions ran high today at St. Mary's University as the campus community gathered to pay tribute to Loretta Saunders. With her two roommates now facing murder charges, over 200 people packed the hall at St. Mary's University. Not a single seat was empty inside the memorial for Loretta Saunders. We are here to honor her, remember her, and show our respect. The death of the young woman who was on the verge of graduating left a deep wound. Your life was truly precious. We all miss your vibrancy and your cheerful spirit. Rest assured, you will never be forgotten. I know your spirit still lingers here with us. The president of St. Mary's has proposed a scholarship in Loretta's memory, pending her family's approval. Tomorrow, they will finally be able to lay their daughter to rest. Loretta's funeral is scheduled to be held in Goose Bay, Labrador. Even with Victoria's partial confession on record, in the initial stages of the case, both Blake and Victoria officially pleaded not guilty. Throughout the preliminary hearings, they remained adamant, refusing to admit to any of the charges they were facing. This meant the case was headed for a full trial, where the burden would be on the prosecution to prove their guilt. Their defense attorneys then filed a motion with the court, arguing that Blake and Victoria should face two separate trials. The defense argued that separate proceedings were crucial to ensure fairness, preventing one defendant's testimony from unfairly swaying the case against the other. But after careful review of the request, the judge ultimately denied it. Having heard arguments from both sides, he ruled that the trial would move forward with both defendants being tried at the same time. This meant Blake and Victoria would stand trial together, side by side, to answer for the charges against them. However, just when it seemed their claims of innocence would be put to the test, the entire situation took a sudden and unexpected twist. On the very eve of the trial, just as proceedings were about to begin, everything changed. Their positions shifted dramatically. The case, which had all the makings of a long and complicated trial, suddenly veered in a completely new direction. And that single decision would profoundly alter the course of the entire case. In Labrador tonight, a wave of relief spread through the community with the news that Loretta Saunders' killers had finally admitted their guilt. A legal document, an agreed statement of facts, was officially submitted to the court. In this formal record, both sides detailed the agreed-upon sequence of events that resulted in the tragedy. This statement pieced together the essential facts of the case, presenting the court with a unified narrative of what occurred. As each defendant gave their version of what happened, a clearer picture of that fateful day started to form. After a lengthy investigation and relentless questioning, the truth of what transpired that day was finally brought to light. According to their accounts, Loretta was in a chair, waiting for them to pay back the rent money she was owed. It should have been a routine interaction, a quick conversation, and she would have left. But in a terrifying instant, everything changed. They both admitted that Blake came up behind Loretta and abruptly started to choke her. The assault was completely unexpected. Loretta fought back desperately, trying to break his grip, trying to defend herself, struggling to survive. In the ensuing struggle, they lost their footing and crashed to the floor together. Blake then tried to asphyxiate her with 4 plastic bags, pulling them over her head one after the other, but still, Loretta refused to give up. She tore through every single bag in a desperate fight for air. Blake then resorted to even greater violence, slamming her head into the floor 2 times. The impacts were so powerful that, finally, Loretta went still. He then covered her head with plastic wrap before forcing her body into his hockey bag. He then dragged that bag down the stairs of the apartment building and put it in the trunk of her car. Then, they just drove off, as if nothing had happened. On their journey, they used Loretta's bank card for purchases like food, but they ran into a snag. They didn't know her personal identification number. So, Victoria picked up Loretta's phone, impersonating her. She sent text messages to Yelchin, attempting to create the illusion that everything was okay. Loretta Saunders was murdered for a single reason. Blake and Victoria murdered her to get out of paying $600, and it is abundantly clear that she fought for her life with every ounce of strength she had. All the evidence indicates she resisted until the very end. It was a meaningless and entirely preventable murder, a crime that never should have occurred. The cold-blooded calculation behind their plan and the elaborate deception that followed is nothing short of monstrous. Once the agreed-upon facts of the case were laid before the court, Blake entered a plea of guilty to first-degree murder. Victoria admitted guilt for second-degree murder. Blake's attorney would later reveal that the choice to plead guilty was entirely Blake's own. He reportedly wanted to spare the Saunders family the agonizing spectacle of a public trial, an ordeal that would have stretched on for weeks, forcing them to see every gruesome detail and piece of evidence dissected in open court. Blake's plea resulted in an automatic life sentence, the maximum penalty for such a crime. He was condemned to spend the remainder of his days behind bars. Yet, even a life sentence comes with legal fine print. In his situation, the court mandated that he would be ineligible for parole consideration for at least 25 years. This represents the standard mandatory minimum for his conviction in cases of this nature. For that entire duration, he is completely barred from even petitioning the parole board for a review. Only after a quarter century has passed can he file his initial application, which will face its own separate evaluation, and even then, release is far from a certainty. Victoria was also handed a life sentence, but the terms of her imprisonment were starkly different. The judge ruled that her eligibility for a parole hearing would arrive significantly sooner. As per the judgment, she is permitted to make her case to the parole board just 10 years after her sentencing. This is no guarantee of freedom. It merely grants her the opportunity to make a request, at which point a board will assess her case to determine if she remains a threat to the public. So while both were condemned to live out their lives in prison, the path to a possible distant freedom could not have been more divergent. She had my daughter's blood on her hands, and she gets 10 years. Tell me, what kind of justice is that? Seriously, what kind is it? A pregnant woman, just a small, pregnant woman, against two hulking monsters, and they call this justice. 10 years. Is that what justice is? For anyone. A pregnant woman was slaughtered by two murderers. I want to see the death penalty brought back. For cold-blooded killers, I want to see capital punishment take them off our streets for good. They don't deserve to breathe the same air we do because they stole the life from my daughter and my grandchild. They showed her no mercy when they killed her, and I believe we should show them none in return. Walking down to the courthouse, deep in my soul, I was praying. I was just saying, God, if you are real, forgive me for doubting. If you're really there, God, and if you have my daughter with you, please make them plead guilty. And it was strange. Then I'd think, oh my God, it was like I was having a conversation with God. And he answered my prayer, and all the prayers of the people who supported us, all those prayers were answered. And I want to thank every single one of them. I feel so many things at once. I'm in pain. I'm going to miss my baby girl forever. But I'm relieved we don't have to endure what was coming. And I feel for their parents. It's just, I can't explain it. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm just so overwhelmed. The judge branded the crime disgusting, horrific, and cowardly. The words hung in the courtroom, each one a heavy blow, followed by a profound silence. This was more than just legal terminology. It was a moral verdict on the act itself, a stark reflection of its senseless brutality. For Loretta's family, the entire judicial process was an emotionally draining nightmare. Each court date forced them to relive the horror from the beginning. Pain, rage, and grief swirled into an unbearable storm. At one point, the emotions boiled over and DM lunged towards Blake and Victoria, screaming at them. It was an explosion of raw, unfiltered agony, the kind that erupts after years of being buried deep inside. As the family left the courtroom, you could still feel the raw tension crackling in the air. And in that charged atmosphere, a voice from the crowd called out to Blake, vowing that they would be waiting for him, waiting for the day he might ever be set free. It was just a few words, but they carried the weight of a promise that, for so many, this story was far from over. In early 2017, Victoria attempted to retract her guilty plea, claiming she wasn't in her right mind and hadn't grasped the gravity of her admission. The court, however, meticulously reviewed her motion and, only a few months later, denied the request. Following that failed attempt, Victoria started to claim she possessed Indigenous heritage through her mother's lineage. While she tried to frame herself as part of the Indigenous community, the parole board later noted there was no evidence whatsoever to support this background. For Loretta's family and many in the community, these assertions felt like another cruel and calculated blow. They didn't hold back, calling statements like that a disgrace to Loretta's memory. In their eyes, it was pure manipulation, a cynical performance designed to curry favor and maybe even secure special treatment. 2 years down the line, Victoria contacted a support center dedicated to Indigenous women. She was hoping the group would either advocate for her release from prison or, failing that, at least lend their support to her appeal. But after looking into her case, the center denied her application. Undeterred, Victoria then made a different kind of appeal. This time, she requested permission to join a talking circle and a drum ceremony being held for Indigenous women. The parole board initially gave her the green light, but that decision unleashed a powerful and overwhelmingly negative public backlash. The sentiment from the public was that it was absolutely outrageous. Bowing to that pressure, the board quickly rescinded its permission. Following the incident, authorities made a formal decision. Victoria was to be barred from accessing any programs or services specifically created for the Indigenous community. At the same time, the aftershocks of another tragedy from several years before were still being felt across the nation. In 2014, a 15-year-old First Nations girl named Tina Fontaine disappeared. Her disappearance sent waves of alarm through the community. Soon after, the worst imaginable news broke. Her body had been pulled from the Red River. Her body had been wrapped in plastic and deliberately weighed down. Police charged a 53-year-old man with her murder, but as the trial unfolded, a major issue surfaced. Because of a critical lack of forensic evidence, the court ultimately found him not guilty. The tragic fates of Loretta Saunders and Tina Fontaine, coupled with a long history of other missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, finally forced this crisis into the national consciousness. Human rights organizations and passionate activists began demanding immediate action. A powerful campaign, built around the haunting hashtag #AmINext, quickly gained massive traction. Its purpose was to expose the systemic crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Activists were adamant, calling for a formal national inquiry to investigate these crimes. That call was finally answered in 2017 when the inquiry was launched. The investigation spanned several years and would become one of the most comprehensive examinations of the issue in Canada's history. The inquiry wrapped up in 2019, producing crucial findings and a roadmap of recommendations designed to prevent such tragedies in the future. Could you tell us, why you decided to testify here today? I chose to be here in Nova Scotia because, well, my daughter, Loretta Saunders, was murdered here. And this is where I feel where all my support is. She began talking with me, helping me to open up and truly see what was happening to our people. She gave me the courage and the will to finally speak up. Before this, I could never speak up in front of anyone. But now, since her passing, and from meeting the people out here who have helped and guided me, Cheryl, she was one of them. She guided me and helped me realize, hey, this doesn't just stop. This isn't the first murder in my family. And most of the time, we're just expected to sit back and cope with it all by ourselves. We have no support. DM launched a blog he called A Homicide Survivor's Journey Through Grief. It evolved into a space for him to speak with raw honesty about the pain of his loss and the complex, winding road of grief. In his writing, he laid bare his experiences and his innermost thoughts, showing how life is forever changed by such a tragedy. But for him, it was about more than just processing his own pain. He also aimed to show the world the true, lasting impact of violence, the kind of devastating aftermath that most people never get to see. In time, he also started collaborating closely with filmmaker Matthew Smiley, the director behind the documentary Highway of Tears. The film spotlights one of Canada's most painful and deeply disturbing problems, the disappearances and murders of people from its First Nations communities. The film's focus is the infamous Highway 16, a road that has held a sinister reputation for decades. It is along this route that a staggering number of Indigenous people have vanished or been murdered. The road is a long, desolate stretch in British Columbia, spanning approximately 724 kilometers. With so many cases remaining unsolved and decades of uncertainty hanging over them, the road earned a grim and haunting nickname, the Highway of Tears. In Halifax, two local movie theaters decided to hold special screenings of the documentary. The reason for these screenings was simple and powerful: to raise money for the Loretta Saunders Scholarship Fund. This scholarship was established in her honor, providing financial assistance for Indigenous women to pursue post-secondary education. For many in attendance, these events were far more than just a film screening. They represented a powerful way to honor Loretta's legacy and to advance the cause she was so passionate about. DM made it clear the screenings were organized for one fundamental reason: to honor Loretta. It was to carry on the mission she started and to ensure the fight she believed in would never be abandoned. She had aspired to do the very same kind of work Matt was involved in. She should have been here, you know? She was a brilliant writer, and he's both a filmmaker and a writer. She was supposed to be fighting for this cause, a voice for the voiceless. Instead, she became just one more number in a tragic statistic. So many things I do today, I don't even notice I'm doing them, but I know it's because somewhere inside, I'm still just trying to make my sister proud. Shortly after, DM was honored with the Ambassador of Conscience Award by Amnesty International. In the short time my sister had on this earth, she taught me more than I could ever say. The lessons she gave me are still the ones that guide and inspire me. And I just hope that by sharing her story and mine, I can make a difference for someone else. Then, in a devastating turn of events in September of 2021, Miriam Saunders delivered news that dealt the family another crushing blow. She had to announce that DM had died. For those who loved him, it was like ripping open a wound that had never fully healed. All the grief the family had shouldered after losing Loretta came rushing back with overwhelming force. It was a painful confirmation of how deeply the aftershocks of a tragedy can run. After Loretta's death, countless lives were irrevocably altered, but for DM, the loss was particularly catastrophic. His ongoing battle with addiction, which was already a formidable challenge, spiraled out of control after she was gone, and his condition steadily worsened over time. The relentless addiction led to catastrophic health complications, culminating in liver failure. In a final, desperate act to break the cycle, DM made a sudden, radical choice. He abruptly stopped all of his medications, believing it was the only way he could conquer his addiction for good. But the consequences of that decision were immediate and brutal. His body plunged into severe withdrawal. The physical agony and discomfort became unbearable as he tried to endure the suffering. He began drinking alcohol to try and ease the pain, but that decision only made everything monumentally worse. What began as an attempt to self-medicate quickly descended into another dangerous spiral, pushing his health past the point of no return. Later, the official cause of death was confirmed as accidental asphyxia. Investigators ruled that his death was a result of complications stemming from his long-term struggle with addiction. It marked another soul-crushing chapter in a story where grief, loss, and addiction had become tragically intertwined in a devastating chain reaction. Last night, dozens gathered in Halifax's Parade Square to honor the memory of a young woman whose story resonated with people from one coast to the other. What took place on February 13th forever changed the course of so many lives. It was one day, one moment that became the point of no return for her family, for her friends, for every person who knew her, and even for strangers who only learned her name from the news. And while time has moved on, the impact of that day has never faded. It lingers in the memories, in the unending pain carried by the people who loved her, and in the quiet moments where her name is still spoken with sorrow. Loretta Saunders was at a thrilling, pivotal moment in her life. It was a time when her future seemed wide open, filled with endless possibilities. Her journey forward was mapped with dreams, plans, and the promise of new beginnings as she built her life piece by piece. And on the horizon, another moment was waiting that would have changed her world forever: the birth of her first child. That anticipation was a source of hope, joy, and the feeling of a new dawn. But Loretta's greatest passion was a calling that was bigger than her own personal dreams. At the very heart of her being was a powerful drive for change. She wanted people to see more, to understand more. Her ultimate goal was to foster awareness, to educate, and to hold on to the belief that these efforts could one day create real, meaningful change. She was convinced that knowledge could open eyes, that words held immeasurable power, and that even a single person could make a profound difference in the world. Which is why it feels right to let Loretta's own words conclude this story, words she penned herself. A passage taken from her thesis, a project she was deeply proud of. It was something she labored on for so long, pouring into it all of her thoughts, her research, and her profound belief that change was truly possible. This was the work she had dreamed of one day sharing with the entire world. And today, those words carry more weight than ever before. My story is not unique. Thousands of girls experience the exact same things I have. Things I couldn't bring myself to wish upon another living soul. And through this project, it is my hope to educate people, to open their eyes, and to offer the hope and inspiration that true change is attainable.